in television news, and then going into an area that I was always interested with, which is public transportation and passenger rail. So I've been a public information officer for both our local transit system here in Columbus, Ohio, and then spent 7.5 years as the public information officer for the Ohio Rail Development Commission, which is famous or infamous, I guess, among, at least among passenger rail circles, is that we developed a plan to start up passenger rail service between our four largest cities in the state, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, and Cincinnati. And we successfully obtained a federal Railroad Administration grant for $400 million to get it started. And then we changed governors. And we went from Democratic Governor Strickland to GOP Governor Kasich. Kasich almost immediately killed the program, sent the money back, and that was the end. Excuse me, that was the end of our foray into passenger rail for the state of Ohio, and at least up until recently, when we found out that that Amtrak had come up with a plan. And if you want to go to the map, Amtrak came up with a plan that was really kind of accidentally leaked, I guess. And here's the map. It was leaked via a story in, of all places, a very small newspaper in Ashtabula, Ohio, which is up in the extreme northeast corner of the state. And Amtrak interviewee, who some of you have probably met, was Derek James. And basically they outlined the plan for Ohio, because Ashtabula was going to be planned as a stop on a corridor between Cleveland and Buffalo, and eventually and also over to Albany, New York. So on the map, you'll see there are roughly 5 corridors that will affect Ohio. The main one, and actually the only brand new corridor, is going to be what we call the 3C and D, which Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati. The other corridors, which are going to hub out of either Cleveland or Cincinnati, will be developed on existing passenger rail routes that Amtrak already serves. So we are the only purely new route that Amtrak has brought on board, and it's pretty exciting when we found out that the 3C was one of them. The 3C, Amtrak's initial plan is to put 3 trains a day on the corridor, and that would probably entail 1 through train, which I'm guessing will probably be an express train, and then the other 2 train sets would be probably positioned in Columbus and run a half corridor each day. They could even be positioned in Cleveland or Cincinnati as well, but I'm assuming it's probably going to be Columbus. So that will enable same day service in the corridor. It's a ways out, and I think that's the caution we've been trying to tell people, not just with our situation, but there are something between 35 and 40 other corridors that Amtrak is putting into this big plan to put before Congress in the next transportation bill. But that caution is that, this is not going to happen overnight. A lot of these corridors are going to take at least a couple years, if not more, of environmental review, preliminary engineering, all that stuff. We're figuring from what we learned doing the 3C when I was with the Rail Commission, it was going to be at least 4 to 5 years from the time we got the federal funding to the time we started running the trains, which would have been roughly in 2015. But because that didn't happen, they're probably going to have to start pretty much from square one, although I would contend they could take the research that ORDC did and essentially use that as at least the foundation for the work they have to do. So we're figuring it could be at least 5 years, possibly a little bit more, before the first trains get running. So we're trying to manage the expectations, but it is huge news. I can't even begin to describe to you how the social media that we have, and we have a big presence on both Facebook and Twitter, and it is still growing. The number of likes we've had to our page has grown by over 2,000% in the last 2 weeks. It's just incredible how this has lit a fire under people, and that's a good thing. But if that's happening at all, where you are, that would be my advice: is manage those expectations, keep the excitement generated, but be honest with people, let them know that, hey, there's a process that goes in with this plan, whether it's a state supported plan like what Ohio was doing 10 years ago, or if it's completely on Amtrak's dime. And that is the big difference between then and now. It's always been states like Ohio and Kansas and Oklahoma and Missouri and whatnot that have been knocking on Amtrak's door saying, please, please, please give us service. And this time around, it's Amtrak knocking on our door, saying, hey, we want to include your state in our long range plans. So, and I'm gonna actually click to some notes that I've got here, because I think it's important that we talk about some of this stuff. One of the lessons learned out of this, I think, was that this is why it's valuable to keep plans alive. Even though the 3C that we had planned in Ohio was essentially killed off in 2010, we kept pushing it. We kept talking about it. We kept it up on the radar. We stayed in touch with Amtrak. We let them know that, hey, we've got some really good corridors. The FRA helped out a lot, because the FRA, independent of us, was basically identifying corridors that they thought were really potentially good, viable passenger rail corridors for the future. So I think the fact that we have kept corridors alive, whether it's the Heartland or the 3C and D, is valuable, because trust me, Amtrak noticed this. They know that these are potentially good corridors. They also have the current state supported corridors to point to as having a demonstrated history of growth, both in passenger base, but more importantly, in creating a demand for more and better service beyond that. And that kind of brings me to my next point. We have to, as advocates, we have to be making sure that Amtrak knows that we see their plan as a floor and not a ceiling. It should be a foundation for more and better, because frankly, that's going to happen. And trust me, if the experience that I have seen with the Amtrak Down Easter between Boston and Maine, the state supported corridors in Virginia and North Carolina, Illinois, Michigan, is that the moment those trains get running, it is usually less than a year when you start hearing people saying, hey, we want more trains. We want to be able to leave at different times, or we want a whole new corridor to serve our community. Michigan DOT is already looking at a possible corridor that would run roughly from the Detroit, Ann Arbor area up into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They announced that about a year ago. Very early on, but again, it's got people. It's coming up because people are saying, look, we need to be better connected. We need to have an option when we have old man winter blow through the center of the country and pretty much shut down a lot of highways, or at least make highway travel difficult. We still have to be able to connect. We still have to be able to go places, whether that's to a job or to, or access to education or healthcare, what have you. We've got roughly 7 major medical centers between Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, and Cincinnati. And there is a huge amount of traffic that goes up and down the interstate corridors because of that. Because there's a lot of competition between these medical centers, and a lot of patients and doctors that are going back and forth.
So actually, a rental car company has purchased their vehicles as business vehicles. They're not personal vehicles, so the vehicles on our platform are all for personal use. So if a rental car company,
I'm not sure I heard that. I'm not sure I heard that. Can you repeat it? Deborah, did you hear what that comment was? You need to unmute. Okay, let me go ahead on and we'll open it up for questions pretty quickly here. Um, anyways, but I think the other thing that we have to consider as well is that there's still a lot of work to be done at the state and local level. I mean, we're all kind of breathing a sigh of relief that Amtrak, for the first time in its history, is taking a proactive stance on growing their system. But there's still things that we have to do at the local level, at the state level. I think amongst which are making plans for at the local level, where are these trains going to stop? If Amtrak announces a stop, or if there's an intermediate stop that we think is potentially good, how does that get folded into the plan? What do we do with the station itself? Does it have to be a new station? Can it be a restoration of an existing depot that we've got? The other thing is, how do we go about capturing the value of the economic development and jobs that can grow up around rail stations? I think Brightline down in Florida is an excellent example. They didn't just put a train on the tracks. They went in there with the plan to buy and develop real estate around these station stops to create mixed use developments, residential, office, retail, what have you, and then plow the profits from that back into the service that they were providing. They've done it well enough that they're already in the midst of their expansion from Fort Lauderdale up to Orlando, and I think they're about a year away, maybe a year and a half away from making that connection. So that's a really good model to look at. Is Brightline. There are a number of ways that the economic development can be captured and put back into the ground, so to speak. Could be tax increment financing zones or other examples, economic enterprise zones. The other thing that probably is wise to look at is there any mechanism at the state level to direct funding at projects like this, at restoring a depot, or building new stations, helping to fund first mile, last mile connections. That could be a state function, that could be a local function, but it's a question that has to be examined, I think. Establishing state passenger rail investment funds with dedicated funding is another thing that I think a lot of states are going to have to look at. We are in the process of proposing that to the Ohio General Assembly, because even with Amtrak pushing a plan where it's essentially all on their dime, there is still going to be need down the road for developing other corridors. If we want to add service onto one of Amtrak's corridors, is that going to be on their dime again, or do we have to come up with an 80-20 match or a 90-10 match, something like that? So there are very few states that have a dedicated fund that goes strictly to transit and rail. There are some. State of Virginia is a really good example. As a matter of fact, their governor just called for investing $50 million into passenger rail development to be able to expand the system that they've built in Virginia. So a state's got to find the plan that works for that state. Essentially, I'm not, but I'll point out some models, because I think that we can see areas where this is working. The other thing that I would really urge advocates to do is to identify your allies along the corridors: colleges and universities, major employers, healthcare centers. They all have needs for being better connected. Deborah and I talked on the phone the other day. A really good example is the University of New Hampshire at Durham, New Hampshire. Their campus literally straddles the Amtrak Downeaster line, and the university actually owns the old train station. A friend of mine here in Ohio, he's a college president here in Ohio now, but he was the president of the University of New Hampshire at the time. And they saw the potential of this, and they immediately made the Downeaster part of their marketing plan to both students and faculty and parents, basically saying, look, you really don't, if you come to our campus, your son or daughter doesn't need to have a car because we've got access to the Downeaster. There's a parallel bus service that runs between Portland and Boston. They've got plenty of mobility if they want to go home or if you want to come to visit. Faculty members have that same availability. In fact, if they're bringing in a trailing spouse or significant other, that becomes a recruitment tool for the university. So, and frankly, the same is true of major employers. I've talked to a hospital executive here in Ohio who says, matter of fact, it's a hospital up in Lima, Ohio, and he says the hardest part that he has in recruiting top flight medical and research personnel is the question that comes invariably from the rest of the family is, oh my gosh, Lima, Ohio, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Well, it really isn't, and it's actually a very, very nice city, but the area around it is largely very rural farmland. His point to me was if I could have access to passenger rail, then I can tell these folks, hey, yeah, Lima's not the big city, but if you really want to have access to the big city, we've got a train here that can have you in downtown Chicago in under 2 hours. And that's a recruitment tool. That's a way to build business and connect business with potentially a larger workforce as well. The other people that I would enlist support of is organized labor, especially in the construction unions and the rail unions. And I'll tell you a brief little anecdote. My former boss at the Rail Commission was very conservative, lifelong Republican. But he saw that vision of what rail could do. When we were pushing our high-speed rail plan here in Ohio under his leadership, we got in front of the Ohio Association of General Contractors, which is all of the heavy construction people. They, and our presentation was on building a network of high-speed rail passenger lines in Ohio. And we got the predictable reaction at first of people leaning back in their chairs saying, oh yeah, well, I've heard high-speed rail before. I'll believe it when I see it, that sort of thing. And when Jim finished outlining what the plan was, he got to the point where he said, well, we're talking between 50 to 75,000 construction jobs created, to make sure this thing is constructed. And as a group, everybody in that room suddenly leaned forward on their tables or desks, and started paying attention. And he saw that and he said, who do you think is going to build this? This is the work of heavy contractors and major engineering, transportation engineering companies, all of that. So don't lose sight of that aspect of, this is almost an immediate job creator when it comes to building the system and getting a corridor ready to accept fast, frequent trains on the corridor. So that's kind of some notes that I've been working on. The last thing I guess I would leave you with is let's not assume that everything's going to be great once the federal transportation bill is passed. As if you've talked to anybody at Amtrak, they are very honest in saying that, hey, this is a series of 5-year federal transportation bills that are going to be key to this. So we're going to have to really keep up our advocacy effort and push for this on a continuing basis, not just to get through the first 5 years, but the next 5 years and the 5 years after that. And honestly, I guess it's a legitimate question to ask once the initial funding it gets passed in Congress. I think it's legitimate for us to go to Amtrak and say, all right, look, what is your long game? What is your, we know you're planning 5, 10, 15 years, but what is the long game beyond that? What is the vision? We're being told that long distance trains are going to get back their daily service, the ones that were cut back. But I think Amtrak says these things and assumes that we're all just going to breathe a sigh of relief and go back to what we're doing. I think we have to really constantly be vigilant and be asking questions of them. We've got an administration in Washington. We've got the number one and number two passenger rail, fans in the country now. But and that's great, but we can't sit back on that. I think as advocates, you got to stay engaged and involved, even when things are in your favor. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm done with my notes, and let me see if I can get back to the screen here. Here we are. And if you want to lose the map slide, that's fine, so we can all see each other. I'm open for questions, and hopefully I'll have some answers.
Okay, let's go ahead and open the chat box and see where we're at in terms of questions. Can you see it?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
The first one is, what is the capital cost estimated?
The capital cost, and right now that's ultimately going to be determined by what Amtrak finds out when they go through their environmental process. They have to go through all of the same steps that we did as a state. But our projection was, and when we asked for and were granted the grant by the FRA in 2009, our projection was it would take about $400 million to get the service up and running in the corridor. Those costs may have changed. Again, you have to go back and re-examine the corridor, find out if there's been any major changes. One of the big things that's affected it here in Columbus is that the historic site of the old Union Station in downtown, Union Station was torn down illegally, I might add, without demolition permits back in the early 70s. But the area where it sat has all been built up. And the rail corridor through that critical junction downtown has been so narrowed that back when we were looking at it, the railroads pretty much told us, we do not want you to stop a train in that part of the corridor. It's got to be away from that junction, because if you stop a train, we have to stop all of our freight traffic, and there's really no place to pull a train off of the main line in that spot. But there's a couple of alternatives. But that's some of the things that I say, just because it illustrates that costs can change, needs can change. So at any rate, that's kind of where we're at in terms of what it will cost. I mean, this is a big ticket item. And what Amtrak is talking about is $5 billion a year every year for 5 years. So it's $25 billion for this expansion in each of these 5-year packages.
Right.
So that's a huge amount of money.
We've got about 5 minutes left, Stu.
Okay.
So I would like to open it up. Gary, if you could unmute everyone so that legislators can ask questions.
I did see one question about projected ridership. Our projected ridership on the 3C corridor was just under 500,000 passengers a year. Amtrak thinks that they can generate with their plan probably enough to get that up to close to 1 million passengers a year. And I'm quoting Derek James on that. So
I see. Okay. We'll be unmuted here shortly.
Okay. To those of you I haven't seen join, hi. It's nice to meet you all.
Stu's actually waiting to pick up his granddaughter. That's the great thing about technology these days.
Yeah, and again, I apologize for the sacrilege of sitting in a car right now, but I would of course much rather being on a train, although I'm actually within eyesight of the 3C corridor where I sit right now. So
that's cool. Okay, it looks like folks are
everybody
unmuted now. Does anyone have any questions for Stu?
Hey, Deborah, I got a question.
Sure.
Hey, Stu, can you discuss, you covered the relationships with FRA, Amtrak, city, county stakeholders. What about the carriers or the railroads? Can you describe successes or challenges you had with them, and if they put up roadblocks to this, how you guys navigated around that?
Yeah, in our experience, and this again is going back to when I was with the Rail Commission, we had a lot easier time with Norfolk Southern at the time because, well, at the time their CEO was Wick Moorman, who was far more, passenger friendly. The railroad that we had the difficulty with, although not insurmountable, was CSX. Those are the two primary carriers in this part of Ohio. We've got 36, 37 different railroads in Ohio, but there's really only two major Class 1 railroads that go through the state and serve the majority of the state. The thing that I learned from working with Jim Sini, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, thing I learned from working with him, you got to get the railroads to the table right from the start. And to find out, all right, look, we'd like to be able to run in this corridor. What do you need? It's not how do we get trains running in this corridor? It's what do you need to make this corridor compatible for both freight and passenger? Tell us what your needs are, because these are the improvements that go into that corridor are permanent, long-term, upgrades, and that's everything from track to passing sidings to bridges to upgraded signals to upgraded grade crossings or maybe grade crossing eliminations. All of that has to be, or I shouldn't say eliminations, but separations. All of that has to be factored into the cost. And I think, as long as you can go to the railroad, whatever that host railroad may be, and be able to say, look, how do we get this done? But also, how do we make sure that you are still whole, or maybe even better in terms of of running your freight? And get them to the table, get them involved in the discussion early on. The worst mistake that I've seen made is for a plan, and we had plans early on in Ohio, and before I became involved in it, where there was a plan for a bullet train using mostly existing rail corridor, and basically it got dropped in the railroad's lap as kind of an all or nothing proposition, and all they had to say was, hey, this is the first we've heard of it. Why is that?
Stu, it's now, I'm sorry to interrupt, it's now 1:30. I know we have some people that need to go to
Sure.
other meetings. I just wanted to do a couple of things. Announce next week will be Jim Matthews with Rail Passengers Association, and he will be talking about federal funding for passenger rail. And if you have any ideas for topics or presentations, please reach out to us. You can email us at the Northern Flyer Alliance at gmail.com. Or if you want my phone number, I can provide that to you as well.
Hey, Deborah,
Yes.
if I may, if anybody has any other questions, you can email me at footstew, FOOTESTU @gmail.com. Deborah has my phone number. I'm more than happy to talk by phone as well, or video conference or whatever. But I know we won't get all questions asked and answered today, but please feel free. I'm more than happy to do that. And if I can't get the answer, I'll find somebody who can.
Okay, my phone number will be in the chat. Well, I want to thank everyone for your participation today, and we really appreciate your time. And I just hit enter, so my phone number should be there shortly. So hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks again, everybody.